Seth, we've just gotten to watch a really incredible performance. You as Richard St. George. As someone who worked on the exhibition for a long time, seeing it transformed into a theatrical piece was really powerful. And I wondered, for you as an actor, we crafted this piece in 2019 and headed into the fall. What was the most interesting part of the development and the creation process?
I think it was creating a real human being who really lived. I've done many plays where I'm playing maybe a historical figure, but the historical figure that I'm playing is the playwright's interpretation. And this is that to some degree, but this, because it's for the museum, we were much more careful to be historically accurate with everything. And so that was an interesting challenge and had a sort of a different focus. It had to be dramatic, but it also had to be true.
Working with Chris Brock, the playwright who wrote our Cost Revolution theatrical piece, I think was a really great opportunity to see how a dramatist, would craft this into a narrative. Maybe I have two questions. One is, what do you think is the most interesting thing about the historical Richard St. George? And is that or isn't that the same as the most interesting thing about the theatrical performed Richard St. George?
That is an interesting question. I would say that the historical St. George it's just a fascinating point of view to hear. We don't learn the other side in school. We learn about George Washington and the American Army, whatever, but being able to hear the ideas, the thoughts, the reactions, the loves and fears of someone on the British side of the war is pretty extraordinary. And to me, they're sort of one and the same. I mean, one of the things that I think Chris, our playwright, did so well was he was able to take text from letters that Richard St. George himself wrote, from what other people wrote about him, that is word for word from that historical first, primary source material. But you can't tell in this piece what was that and what is what he wrote, because he found that voice. And then my job was just to inhabit the voice. It's interesting, I never do usually historical research when I'm doing a play, because other than having to know what I'm talking about, I don't really need that, because that's not, I'm playing the playwright's version. But for this, I did a lot of historical research. And it is really interesting to walk through that exhibit and see the paintings and that I am speaking about in the piece. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think you could watch this piece and assume it was totally a work of fiction, but Chris Brock placed all these Easter eggs in it. The paintings that you mentioned, right. The portrait of Anne, the image of Paoli, those are real paintings. We had them here at the museum for the exhibition. And then there are also a lot of really subtle Easter eggs about the cultural history that was happening at the time, the Jacobins and the Bastille and Rousseau. Do you have any favorite little breadcrumbs that you're laying as an actor, and some people pick them up and some people follow them and others might just gloss over them?
I think it's mostly the paintings. I really loved visualizing the paintings. And because I was able to study those paintings up close and personal in the exhibit, I was able to really be seeing them when I was describing them. And as an actor, they always tell you got to see what you're talking about, And so for me, it was really powerful to really be able to see them. It's an interesting thing that people would ask me, should we see the play first and then go walk through the exhibit, or walk through the exhibit first and then see the play? And I never figured out the answer.
Yeah, I think it would be a totally different experience watching this knowing they were real, or watching this and then being like, wait, I feel like didn't he describe that? Oh, there's that strange Italian house in the middle of Germantown, Pennsylvania.
And I would make a point at the end of every time I performed it, I would say something quickly to the crowd. And what I would say is, if you haven't seen the exhibit, go take a look. And if you have seen it, go look again, because the paintings that I'm talking about are there, the real ones. And you can experience them in a different way, having heard to some degree perhaps what Richard St. George felt about them.
He was someone who has always struck me that he kind of intentionally lived a theatrical life. He saw himself almost as a character in his own drama. He produced artwork, he produced these pageants.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you figured him out as a person? Did you get to see through the script that he crafted about himself and think about his motivation in any interesting ways?
the way the play is written, I sort of move in and out of different places in his consciousness. Every now and then I kind of go to another place where he's remembering something as if it's still happening. And so trying to sort of navigate that was interesting for me. I like to think that I unpacked him to some degree. One of my most memorable experiences in this whole project was when we did the opening night celebration and Richard St. George's descendant, like first cousin 7 times removed or what have you, was in the audience watching me perform it. And I met him afterwards, and it was an extraordinary thing. Like I was somehow talking through time, because I felt like I was Richard, and here's my descendant 7 generations later who I'm able to say this to. It was fascinating.
If Richard St. George had descended through time, he was in the room with us here, is there one question or one thing you've been trying to figure out that you would ask him?
I don't know. That's a great question. How much of it is, what do you see? Like, because what he wrote himself, what people wrote about him, and his artwork after his injury is so weird, and so out there and so intense. He was an intense man to begin with. If you read anything about the guy, even before he ever went off to war, I talk in the piece about how, he was upset that he wasn't injured more than he had been injured before this happened. And apparently that he was always wanted to be on the front, and he always wanted to be running, he was like, I don't know, some weird sort of requirement there of his manhood. And I think that that's another thing that's in this, is so much about a man who lost something about his manliness as a result of his injury, and it really affected him. It's such a sad story that he finally meets this woman who makes everything okay, and then she goes ahead and dies. This guy has had no luck.
Yeah, I like to tell people when the exhibition was open that, spoilers, he kind of ends up on the wrong side of 2 revolutions. And yet what was so exciting about the piece is that, from the macro level, Richard St. George is not a super sympathetic guy. He's an elite, wealthy, white, property-owning, Irish landholder, male. He's all the things that make him kind of at the pinnacle, and in a way that maybe hasn't aged that well. We want to sympathize with the Continental soldiers and with the Irish revolutionaries who rose up and murdered him. But he's kind of like a fractal. The closer you look, you see he's a father and a widower, and he's a combat wounded veteran who deals with a traumatic brain injury and kind of the darkest legacies of a war that we don't assume really had dark legacies. We don't think about these men coming home and grappling with that. And I think, to me, the theatrical piece, the exhibition, really just accomplished that, showing you that everyone is really complex, even the traditional villains.
It's one of the most rewarding things about playing a not nice person, a villain or what have you, is if you can make them sympathetic so that the audience feels for you even though you are despicable in many ways. That's really, really cool. And that's exploring the human condition, which is what we're doing, whether it's through the art that we see here, or the history that we see here, or the theater, or whatever. It's who are people, and how do they do what they do, and why do they do it? Because we learn something from that, something that takes us beyond ourselves into something larger.
Is there anything about this story that you think speaks to our moment today in particular that we haven't talked about? What makes this story resonant now? We're filming this in 2020. We did most of our preparation work for this virtually.
Yeah.
But in the complicated, global, difficult times we're in, is there anything that compels you about this story?
I think it's related to what I was just talking about, which is that there are people, even if they're despicable people, and they have a backstory, and they have someone that they loved, and they had the thing that happened to them that damaged them, and that doesn't mean it's okay for them to be despicable, but it means that it's more complicated than it looks like on the surface. That it's not just the redcoats are the British, we're the good guys. There was more to it than that. But it's hard today. Things are so different, and the way we interact with power is so different, and the way that we talk about relationships and to power and some of that is so different, and getting better every day, I think, because we're starting to call out power for what it is.
Is there anything we haven't talked about you think is worth saying about this piece?
I really enjoyed it. It's been a great project to work on as an actor, as a person, as a creative person. And it's been just a pleasure to work here at the museum. It's just been great.
Well, thanks for joining us, Seth.
Thanks for having me.